Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of ENG4E Term 2A, brought to you by Wausau Distance Education Center. I'm your instructor, Mike Laverty, and today is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. So we're on to Class 10, and we are moving ahead with Unit 2 of our course. So we're looking at key questions 23, 24, and 25. And our discussion today, as it was yesterday, and most of this unit is devoted to our novel Where the Rivers Meet. So it's very important that you start reading this novel as soon as possible, and best case scenario, you're reading it as I discuss it in these classes to come. So in during weeks 3 and 4 of the course, so this week and next week, we'll be discussing the novel at length. So, I guess best case scenario, you would have had the book read by now, but I know that people get busy. But so if you can, just try and read as many chapters as you can, and try to get ahead of it as much as you can. There are 15 chapters in the book, and I'll give you some sort of nudges along the way to let you know where you should be in terms of reading the reading the chapters and staying on top of this. So we are in week 3 of classes in term 2A. March break is from the 13th to the 16th. No broadcasts or classes during that time. And you will join the if you're on Facebook, please join the Wausau Facebook group. It says new in the title of the group. So if you're on Facebook, we're trying to encourage as many students as possible to sign up, to join the page, and get information about Wausau, about the program, about upcoming terms, exciting things happening, contests, prizes, draws, that kind of thing. So if you're on there, please consider joining the page. So we took care of Unit 1. That's done. Weeks 3 and 4 is what we're on now. And we should be able to get this done. We may have to do a little bit of Week 5, but I'm hoping that we can take the 2 weeks to adequately touch upon the novel and all the questions therein. So I'm hoping the schedule keeps up throughout the course of the course. So, we can do 2 weeks for each unit and then leave all of week 9 to go over the final exam preparation. So as we get closer to that date, I will keep you in the loop and let you know what's coming. So if you're listening to us on the radio, please know that you can phone in. So if you're on 91.9, note that you can phone 1-800-465-7144, or you can phone 1-807-737-4017. You can also listen on the Bell ExpressVu channel 972. And if you go to zoom.us, you can join the Zoom meeting. Meeting ID is 417-669-9799. All the videos are found on my YouTube channel, Laverty Wausau. So right now, you will find classes 1 through 9 up on my YouTube channel, and as of tomorrow morning, you'll see class 10. Please submit your work as soon as possible. Yeah, it's important to stay on top of the assignments. So talk to your learning center, talk to your DC, find out ways that you can send your work in. So if you're able and you have access to the technology, you can scan your work, take a picture of it, put it in the mail, whatever the case may be, to get it to us. You have many options to do that. You can fax pages using a toll-free fax number, 1-800-463-7852. And like I said, you can take pictures with your phone. So if that's the case, then go ahead and do it. But if you need help, then reach out to your learning center, reach out to your DEC. That's what they're there for. Reach out to myself. A friendly reminder to send in small batches of work. 5 to 10 is probably the best case scenario. Less is better. You know, if you have 1 or 2, that's better than say 12 or 15. So it's just I applaud students putting in the work, but it's not good to give me too much work to assign, because then it takes me a long time to get it back to you. But it also, you know, it affects your ability to improve and to get better, right? You know, my job is to show you ways that you can improve and show you ways that you can become a stronger writer, reader, you know, understander of the human language in general, right? So that's part of the process, is that give and take between us. So, and when you do submit work, please give me as much information as you can: your name, your community, your chorus code, ENG4E, as much information as you can. Reach out to me anytime you want. mlaverty@nnecschools.org. Find me on Facebook. Hit me up on Messenger, Laverty Wassa. Give the office a call in Sioux Lookout, 1-807-737-1488, extension 2211. If you get the receptionist, just ask for Mike. Monday through Thursday, I teach 1 to 3. But Friday, you can find me all day in the office. And, of course, from 9 till 12:30-ish in the mornings, you can find me. So reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. That's my job. So I place that above all other responsibilities. So if you reach out to me with a question about the course, about an assignment, I will get back to you as soon as I can. So here is your suggested progress. If you've been doing this, you know, if you're about 2 weeks into the course, 2 weeks in a couple of days, you know, I would say, yeah, 2 weeks and 2 days into the course. And so I say this to all the independent learners out there, that even though you technically have until June, I really do suggest that you do this course following the 9 to 10 week schedule we have laid out here. So at this point, you should have made contact with your teacher through email, messenger, or phone. You should have read the study guide, Unit 1 and Unit 2 of ENG4E. Should have read chapters 1 to 3 of our novel, Where the Rivers Meet, and completed key questions 1 through 21 of Unit 1. That's all of them. So everything except the culminating activity from Unit 1 should be completed. All right, so here's today's lesson. We'll look at our words of the day. We'll be taking a closer look at Chapter 4 and how to write a chapter reflection, and a breakdown of key questions 23, 24, and 25. We will learn strategies for learning new words and guessing their meaning, explore the elements of narrative and Where the Rivers Meet, and learn how to analyze and write about novels for chapter reflections and other assignments. Right? So we're learning about encountering new words in a novel and any kind of reading we do, and trying to figure out what those words mean. We're looking at the elements of narrative that we discussed in Unit 1. A plot, characters, themes, settings, right? So looking at those elements of narratives and how they play out in Where the Rivers Meet. And then we're going to learn how to analyze and write about novels for chapter reflections and other assignments, right? So you're going to learn how to analyze and write about novels, and one of the ways I'm going to do that is to emphasize using those elements of narrative. So when you talk about a work of fiction, when you talk about a novel, you're analyzing it. And one of the best ways to analyze something is to put it into different categories and to analyze the specific parts of it, right? So you identify the type of literature you're looking at, and then once you know the type that it is, then it's going to have certain conventions and a certain framework that you can identify, right? So, like TV shows and TV commercials and magazines and radio advertisements, and they're all different forms of expression. They're different ways that we express ourselves. Paintings and TikTok videos and sculptures, right? So, and then our music, our metal songs or hip hop songs, right? All of these different forms of expression can be analyzed, and they can be broken down into their parts, right? So it's important to break things down into their parts, but then it's also important to see how those parts work together to make a whole. And that's actually a discussion that Nancy has in the novel with one of her English teachers. And she perceives that her English teacher is way too obsessed with breaking things down into their little parts, that he never sees how they work as a whole. And so we got to be cautious of that too as students of English. So, but I think it's really important to focus on that and to focus your writing on specific parts of the novel, while also seeing how those parts fit into the whole novel. So your success criteria will be to use your understanding of novels and our selected novel, Where the Rivers Meet, to respond to several unit assignments from Unit 2. So that's your success criteria. So using your understanding of novels in general and your knowledge of this novel to answer those questions. So on the second class of the week, I like to delve into some words of the day. So up on the screen we have two words in Anishinaabe-Moan or Ojibwe. So Mazaniigan is a noun, which is a book, a letter, a document, a paper. And Dibajimoen is a noun for a narrative or a story. So again, if anyone out there wants to correct my spelling or my pronunciation, please feel free to do so. I'm not a speaker of the Anishinaabe-Moan language, nor am I qualified to teach someone how to speak it. So I just wanted to clarify that that's not my intention when I put these words up on the screen. I think it's really important for someone who's studying language and for someone who's taking an English course. Our focus is, of course, on the English language, but it's important to look at different languages and see how they're arranged and how their words and sentences are built. And it just helps to expand your vocabulary. And I thought especially, the most logical language that came to my mind was Anishinaabe-Moan. So there's those two words in the language. In English, I have the word novel, which is a noun, which is a fictitious prose narrative, right? So yesterday we talked about that word verse, right? So, verse, whoops. No, actually, I'm not sure we talked about this, but in any case, so verse is poetry, and prose is basically things that are not poetry. Prose comes in nonfiction and fiction, right? So it's a fictitious prose narrative, which again just means a story that someone's telling, of book length, typically representing character and action with some degree of realism. From the Italian novella, which means a new story. And so novel has a second description or a definition of something that's new. So if you develop novel uses or novel inventions, right? So novel technically means new. But the first definition of novel is a book length narrative that's written in prose. representing character and action, right? And then action would be the plot, right? That'd be what happens in the book. And then as we saw yesterday, that as the plot unfolds, there's conflict. That's the action as well. So the action is going to be how the conflict unfolds, and then how the deeper theme and like the deeper story emerges, right? Just wanted to briefly touch upon assignment 22. We kind of rushed through it yesterday, so I just want to make sure that people understand that question, right? So when you flip through your unit, the unit 2 handout that you should have in your hands, on page, where does it start? We have on page 23. We have a glossary, right? And the glossary, it gives you a word. So in this case, we have skeins, or skeins, not sure. A noun is a loosely coiled bundle of yarn or thread, a number of geese in flight. Page 23, exorbitant, much too great in price or demand. Frenetic, wildly excited or worried by anxiety. Now I want you to pay attention to, page 12 tells me, where in the novel. And then it also gives me the part of speech it is, right? So I know that frenetic is an adjective. It should probably describe a thing, right? So wildly excited or worried by anxiety. So I just want to read the specific wording of the question, so that's clear to everybody. All right, so what you do is you have to pick 10 of those words. 10 of the words listed on page 6. There's several words for every chapter of the book has several key words picked out. So you pick your 10 words, but you have to write a sentence of your own demonstrating your understanding of them. So if we go to page 107 and we scan for that word, frenetic, which is a great word. All right. It's like doing a word search here. I had it earlier. I didn't make a note of it. Okay. Okay, she dreaded it, going back to school. Okay. So it had seemed strange at first to be with people again, and she was grateful that her first contact had been with Mrs. Schmidt. So this is much further into the novel, where Nancy has met this elder named Mrs. Schmidt, and then she's gone through an experience with her, and I don't want to spoil too much, but she's been away with people for a long time, and now she's kind of getting used to being around people. And here's the sentence where this word comes up. Her first real shock was her trip into town. The activity seemed frenetic, and the noise was deafening. When she went into the cafe, friends smiled and asked her where she'd been. So frenetic is an adjective. In this case, it describes the noun activity. So the activity was wildly excited or worried by anxiety. So I think wildly excited would probably be the closer definition. So now you've got to use that word in a sentence. If you're going to use the word frenetic in a sentence, it's going to be an adjective, right? So in your sentence, you need a noun. for this word? Right? It's a description, right? So it could be a description of a person. It could be a sound. A sound can be frenetic. A person could be frenetic. An animal could be frenetic. Yeah, so just that's what I would do. So you just got to identify, what does this word mean? Read the sentence in the book. Read the definition that's been given to you, and then pay attention to the part of speech that it is, right? And if you've got that figured out, you should be able to write a sentence that demonstrates your understanding of that word. All right, and then I also wanted to touch upon these chapter questions. So it's hard for me to discuss the chapter questions without, just giving you the answers, but I'll do my best to review them and just make sure you understand what's being asked of you, okay? So what is the setting for the novel? If you go back to class number 9, I did a discussion on the setting of the novel. So I would, be specific. So tell us what the setting is for the novel. Where does it take place? What is Nancy doing at the beginning of the story? What First Nation does Nancy's people belong to? Actually, I should mention that the guided reading questions, there were 70 marks in total, but some questions are a little more, require a little more thinking from you than other questions, right? So I can put that up on the screen. So the setting, 2 marks. What is she doing? 1. And question 4 is 2. So not always, but basically 1 sentence per mark, right? So if the question says what is the setting of the novel, and you write down, a small town in BC, that might get you, 1 mark, right? And so you could all write that down and get your half mark, but to get the full marks, you need to add more. So go back to our discussion of setting. What does setting entail? Be specific. With all these things, right? Always be specific. Be as specific as possible. Cite the text. Maybe we can talk about that tomorrow, how to actually cite the text. But, cite the text, use examples. What First Nation does she belong to? 1 mark, that's just one thing, right? So tell me who her people are. Towards the end of the chapter, Nancy asks George, when are we going to get out of here? I want to leave this place. Why does she ask this? Again, 2 marks. You're going to need at least 2 details, At least 2 details or reason she says that. Describe, chapter 2, part 1. Describe the local school as Nancy views it. 2. What is the name of Nancy's school? 1. Who is Donut Stevenson? Why is she usually upset with Nancy? 1. So again, look at how much marks are given for each question before you answer it, Don't write 5 sentences for something that requires 1 mark, and don't write a couple of words for something that requires 2 marks. So just pay attention to how many marks are being asked and answer accordingly. Why is Quigley the teacher that Nancy and the other students disliked the most? 1 mark. Who is Mark Bateman? Why does Nancy have a problem with him? 1. 10. Why does Nancy look up to Bernice Wu, her home economics teacher? 2. Okay? So, if it's worth 2 or more marks, absolutely, write that in a full sentence, okay? Full sentences whenever possible. Writing in full sentences should be your default mode. That should be your default setting when you're answering questions for an English course. Some of these questions, like what's the name of her school, if you just write down the name of the school, that's full marks. But most of these questions, they're write out your thoughts as best you can, okay? Chapter 3. What example is given at the beginning of the chapter of a difference between native and non-native people? So that is 2. So again, that requires some explanation. Who is Simon Grebs? What does he have in common with Larry Mills, the local pub owner? Barry Paul is a friend of Nancy. Briefly describe his character. That's 2. And Barry sees himself as an entrepreneurial sort of guy, a businessman. Please explain. 1. Now, on chapter 4, you'll notice that the first question is worth 3 marks, okay? So that's even more marks, okay? So what, in your view, is meant by the line, the river was only a few hundred feet wide, but it separated 2 countries, 2 realities? So some of these questions are just simply testing and just seeing if you've actually read the book. That's really the purpose of the questions, is to just say, okay, this person has actually read the book, they've done the work. But some of the questions ask you to go beyond what's actually in the book. Because step 1 is just simply reading the book. Reading the book, learning what happens, absorbing the information. That's step 1. Step 2 is to analyze what you've just read. And reflect upon it and think about deeper meanings, right? So when Nancy says the river was only a few hundred feet wide, but it separated 2 countries, 2 realities, what is Nancy getting at, right? What is Nancy... What is Nancy really saying here? Okay? So what does the river represent? What 2 countries are we talking about? What are the 2 countries? I would focus on that. The 2 countries and the 2 realities. Define them. And their relationship. So what are these 2 countries, these 2 realities? Define them. Tell me what they are. Tell me how they work together, how they don't work together, how they oppose each other. Yeah, so that requires a bit more thinking on your part. Briefly describe Nancy's relationship with her father. 2. In this chapter, what is one thing that Nancy's father encourages her to do? 1. What is stated about Nancy's mother? 1. What sport is important to the people of Creighton? 1. All right, so keep that in mind as you answer these guided reading questions. And one strategy you might want to take is to read the questions before you read the chapter, So look at those guided reading questions, like the ones on the board, like, what does Nancy mean by the river was only a few hundred feet wide, separated by two countries, two realities? Jot down her relationship with her dad. When her dad is talking, pay attention for any kind of advice or encouragement he gives her. Pay attention to anything that her dad says about her mom. And pay attention to any sport that's brought up, right? What sport is important to this town? Right? Is it hockey, lacrosse, volleyball, football? What sport is important to the town? And we'll go into these ones later, okay? All right, so key question 22 is your vocabulary builder. Key question 23 are the guided reading questions. So again, the guided reading questions are worth 70 marks. And I don't think it's realistic to do them all in one shot. I would really break them apart. And I think you should really consider doing it chapter by chapter, right? I'm going to sit down and read chapter 1. Before I read chapter 1, I'm going to read the chapter guided questions. So you should have the book in front of you and a laptop, computer, a pen and a pad also in front of you, right? So as you read, you're jotting things down, right? And depending on how much time you have, you may want to just read it on your own with no pen and pad and then go back and make the notes. But I know that my personal preference would be to make notes as I read. That's the approach I would take. Everybody's different, but that's what I would recommend for completing that assignment. Yeah, so assignment 22 is the vocabulary builder, writing your 10 sentences. 23 is the guided reading questions. Key question 24 is worth 30 marks. It's your chapter reflections. So you're going to choose any 6 chapters. So you can choose any 6 from the novel. And for every one, you write a response of at least 5 sentences. So keep that in mind. So 5 times 6 is 30 sentences. So you get a mark for each sentence. Demonstrate subject-verb agreement. And use some adjectives and adverbs to make your writing more interesting. Okay? So each reflection will focus on a single chapter. So you'll do 6 of them. Each one is on a single chapter. I would consider discussing one or more of the elements of narrative. So plot, character, setting, theme, conflict to focus your thoughts. When possible, quote the text directly or paraphrase key details, conversations, descriptions, etc. Okay? So with that in mind, we're going to just delve into chapter 4. So chapter 4 is found on pages 27 through 28. 28 through 38. So 27 through 38, sorry. So when you're trying to understand, and then I often did this as a university student. I would write my own plot descriptions. So I would say okay, in chapter 1 this happened, in chapter 2 this happened. So it's really important, and it's nice to have a summary of the book. And if you do this for every chapter, you'll have a really handy outline for what happened. And this helps for when you're trying to think of timelines and chronology, and okay, did this happen first, and did that happen later? And you'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened. That's probably why Nancy said this, right? So I read chapter 4. I reread chapter 4 last night. And then I typed this up to kind of guide my own thinking. So if we look at chapter 4, the plot, remember the plot is simply what happens. So Nancy walks the road from the ferry to her home in the reserve near the town of Creighton. She surveys her surroundings. She stops in a pocket of green and calm to think about her mother leaving. She describes her home and she makes dinner with her dad. After dinner, she walks back to the ferry landing, and she's offered a ride by a guy named Morgan Adams, who her dad knows, but she declines it. She walks past the abandoned residential school. She goes into town, and she walks into the Wagon Inn pub. Nancy, Barry, and George talk about the upcoming baseball game. Barry gets into a fight and gets kicked out of the pub. On the way home, Nancy pauses on the bridge when panic seized her. I should say her, not here. So one way to do this for your chapter reflection is you could just simply talk about the plot, right? Just summarize the plot, put the plot into your own words, and just that's how you can reflect upon it, right? That's probably the most basic way that you can do this, okay? Is simply outline the plot, okay? So it's a journal response. You have the opportunity to express your opinion on what you have been reading. When you're done with the assignment, you should have a series of 6 responses, okay? So you can just simply describe to me what happened in that chapter, talk about the plot, but as much as possible, talk about your opinion on what happened, your thoughts, your feelings, like I wonder why she did this. So you are, describe. You're going to describe the plot and your thoughts about it, okay? So it's really a 2-part process, right? So you're talking about the plot of the book, simply describing what happens and providing your thoughts about it, right? So just your own responses to it, like just wondering what's going through Nancy's head, questioning why she did certain things, making predictions, guessing what's going through her head. I wonder if, right? That could be a sentence starter. I wonder if, when Nancy did this, I felt, right? So just respond to what happened in the plot. All right, we can talk about setting a lot, right? So the setting is where and when the plot occurred. So in chapter 4, we have many different settings. We have Nancy's home. We have the road from Nancy's home to the ferry landing. We have the bridge where Nancy pauses to think and reflect. So the bridge is probably one of the most important settings in the whole book. The Wagon Inn pub where Nancy meets Barry and George. The spot along the road that usually fills Nancy with calm. The abandoned residential school. So we have these settings, right? So again, it's a similar thing where you're simply just describe or detail important settings. And reflect upon them. You can talk about connections. Make connections to your life, movies, books, stories you may have heard. So when you're writing your chapter reflection and you focus on the element of narrative of setting, it's a similar process to plot. So so step one is you describe and you detail important settings. That is one, okay? And then number two is you reflect on them. You reflect on them, you make connections. So you have to take it beyond just simply listing them and talking about them, but that's where it comes in handy, right? So you find something to talk about. You find a specific element from the text that you want to talk about. So in this case, setting. And then, what does the setting make you think about, right? So so you're citing so if you look at the expectations for this assignment, it says the expectations are to, one, demonstrate understanding of a text by citing explicit information and ideas from it. So you identify explicit things. So when something is explicit, it means that it's said outright. It's on the page. It's in the book. You can't debate it. It's simply what's written in the book. That's explicit information. And then you describe how your own different values and perspectives might influence the way you respond to and interpret text, right? So it's like, here's what's in the book. Here's how that makes me feel, or here's my thoughts on it, right? And you construct those using a variety of complete and correct sentences. So it's, here's something in the book. Here's a specific, explicit aspect of the book that I can write about, and here's my thoughts on it, right? And so the explicit information is the stuff that's in the book. It's how the author wrote the book. The implicit stuff would be like the deeper meaning. You could argue like what the author is really getting at. And that's what analyzing literature is really all about, is you and I can read the same book, and the author has produced one book that's written by or read by thousands, if not millions of people. But our opinion of that book and the way that book makes us feel is going to be very different, right? So that's really what you're doing with these chapter reflections, is you're discussing things that are in the book, but perhaps more importantly, you're discussing how they make you feel. So the elements of narrative, so setting and plot and character, this helps us focus our writing. It helps us select what we're going to talk about, and then we can take the next steps of talking about how that makes us feel and what it makes us think about and what connections we make to it, to our own life, to movies we've seen, to books we've read, to stories we've heard, right? Yeah, that kind of thing. You can talk about conflict. So in chapter 4, we have the difference between Nancy's reserve versus the town of Creighton. We have Nancy thinking about the injustices suffered by her people in the past and the present. Nancy dealing with her mother leaving and trying to connect with her father, right? So these are some conflicts that are being discussed in chapter 4, right? So you could identify ways in which Nancy is struggling. What are the sources of conflict in her life? Can you identify with those conflicts? Do those conflicts remind you of struggles you've had in your life? Can you make, like me personally, I'm from Sioux Lookout, so when I read this novel, I see tons of similarities between Creighton and Sioux Lookout, right? So if I were to answer this question, I might focus, if I was to write a chapter reflection on chapter 4, I think the conflict between the reserve and the town and the injustices, I would probably write about that. I could probably write about that for a while. So conflict is an element of narrative we can talk about when reading a novel, and it gives us a launching point to launch a discussion. We can talk about theme, right? So we have Nancy's ongoing personal transformation, as I would argue is the main theme of the book. How is the world changing her? How is she shaping the world around her? What is going through her mind in this chapter? What is she struggling with the most? Nancy is often thinking about injustice and trying to help her people. In what ways does she consider the problems in her reserve and Creighton in this chapter? Does she think of any solutions, or is she unable to find a way forward, right? So, things like plot and narrative and setting and characters are a little much easier to pin down and to point at. It's a lot harder to flip through a book and just find the theme, because you're never going to find the theme. It's not going to be in the table of content. It's not going to be listed by the author. It might be on the blurb that describes what the book is about, right? So it might be in there. But theme is what emerges over time, right? And theme comes out as the novel progresses, and you see what it's really, really all about. So when you're talking about theme, you're talking about the deep story, right? Beyond what's happening to Nancy, right? Like, what's this story really about? What's the lesson we're supposed to learn? What's the big takeaway, right? So you could write a chapter reflection upon that, and your chapter reflection would be, you could talk about the deeper meaning of the chapter. As a part of a bigger story, or on its own. So how does this chapter function on its own to tell a story? How does the chapter function as part of a bigger story, as part of a bigger narrative, right? So, what's the deeper meaning of this chapter? And you can look at it as part of the novel, or as on its own, right? So that's another way you could approach these chapter reflections. But they are worth a lot of your. It is worth a lot of your mark. So it is worth. Let's see. These are worth 30 marks. So you wanna between this 30 marks for your chapter reflection, and 70 marks for your guided reading questions. That's a total of 100 marks. So it's a huge part of Unit 2. So that's 100 marks for just those two questions, right? And then the culminating activity, I just want to make sure I have that information in front, is 80 marks, right? So the culminating activity, the guided reading questions, and the chapter reflections, these are the bulk of what you're going to be doing in Unit 2. So you got to devote enough time to dealing with that. So that's all the time that we'll have for today's class. We'll come back to this tomorrow, and we'll jump into key questions 25, which is writing a paragraph. But I thought we'd have time for that today, but it kind of got away from me. So thanks for that, and we'll see you tomorrow.